Hello, everyone. I am Joanne Weber. I work at the University of Alberta. I hold a Canada Research Chair, Tier 2. My area of specialty is deaf education in all its various approaches. I'm here today to talk about EAL strategies for deaf students. EAL stands for English as an Additional Language. There are many deaf students who are now immigrating with their families to Canada. They may know more than one language, whether they're spoken or signed languages, from their countries of origin. It's our responsibility as teachers to work with these students considering the contexts they come from and their home environments. Before I carry on with the presentation, I would like to give you a little bit of my background. I am an assistant professor at the University of Alberta in the Department of Educational Psychology. I taught for 17 years as a teacher of the deaf in a resource program in a high school, a specialized program for deaf and hard of hearing teenagers. Several of those students, most in fact, had immigrated from other countries. I also taught in a school for the deaf in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, before it closed down. I have been involved in community-based organizations, specifically the Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, working with them to set up a number of different programs and services related to literacy. I did my PhD at the University of Regina. I was the recipient of the Governor General's Gold Medal for Academic Achievement in 2019. I am also the Artistic Director for the Deaf Crows Collective. We have produced a number of performances as well as arts installations in an effort to encourage and nurture deaf and hard of hearing artists in Saskatchewan. As I prepare this lecture, I'm still in Regina. Edmonton's COVID-19 numbers are spiking right now. We, in Saskatchewan, were the worst, but now Edmonton has that honor. I'm not sure what's happening in BC. We'll see what happens. But when it's safe to do so, the plan is for me to move to Edmonton. I thought I'd begin by giving a bit of history regarding EAL instruction and deaf education. Decades ago, at Gallaudet University, it was noticed that ASL was often the first language and English the additional language for deaf students. As a result, they started to explore EAL strategies available at the time to see how they might apply to deaf students. This was in 1974. It was the first systematic attempt to use EAL methodology for instructing English in the deaf classroom. Gallaudet adopted the regime of EAL instruction, which at the time focused on providing an environment of complete immersion, a regime of repetition, drills and exercises using English only. As a result, Gallaudet started producing their own series of English books, materials, and resources based on pattern practice. With particular emphasis on grammatical features, students would be given countless exercises on the function of verbs, nouns, etc. Then, in 1986, the English Language Institute, ELI, was established at Gallaudet to focus on the emerging need to work with the increasing student population of deaf immigrants or international students and their English learning needs. Deaf students were expected to comprehend text that employed grammar that was foreign to their visual perspective. Research published in 1998 looked at the success of using traditional EAL strategies in deaf education and concluded that it's not that simple. You can't just simply borrow strategies that work with a hearing population and apply it to a deaf population. At the time, ELI instruction did not use ASL English translation exercises. They taught in ASL to explain the concepts conveyed by words in English, but they did not do translation exercises between the languages. There are a number of parallels between deaf students and EAL students. Common to both learners is the struggle with the mechanical or grammatical features of English. For both populations, they continue to struggle to put the words in the correct order. We note that for both groups, intrusions from their native language is evident in the English production. It's natural to pull from your known language into L2. It's not a bad thing. The key is for students to recognize when they are substituting features from their known language and to use strategies to keep the two separate. Deaf and EAL students struggle with the phonology, the morphology, and the pragmatic problems of English. Even though they may have studied English for a number of years, we note that they still struggle with gaining fluency in these elements. Both EAL and deaf students find that their teachers' central focus is on correcting errors in their English, and so they're constantly looking at repairing their mistakes. Continuously correcting errors is not the best way to learn a language or improve literacy skills. In L2 research, there's been a lot of focus on two strategies. Each of them complements the other. The one strategy is what we call noticing. The student is taught to notice how certain features of the language function. What are they doing? How it works. Noticing is designed to develop metalinguistic awareness by engaging students in thoughtful discussions. Some research shows that using noticing strategies when teaching English to deaf students does improve their literacy skills. But what we see in deaf education is that the instruction focuses on lower level skills such as spelling, grammar, word order, and phonology. The research notes that instruction is not explicitly focused on developing metalinguistic skills, such as noticing, with deaf learners. Another important difference between the two groups is that for EAL students, they already have a well-established first language. They are not language deprived. That's a very important distinction. We see a wide range of deficits in the language development of deaf and hard of hearing learners, anywhere from severe to minor gaps in their first language acquisition. Both groups struggle with word reading skills, and by that I mean deciphering the meaning of vocabulary in the context of the sentence and the larger text. Many deaf and hard of hearing learners do not have a foundational understanding of any language, English or ASL. Many have pervasive gaps in their understanding of either language, and that's been an ongoing problem. Most EAL deaf learners have moved here from another country. We don't know what their education might have been like. They may have gone to a school and had rich exposure and a stimulating education, or not. Or they may have attended school regularly and not understood a thing. At home, they may still not understand what's going on, so their brothers and sisters do their homework for them. So in the end, they are still not learning anything. They may have some hearing or no hearing. So the student may come with no language and no education, or may be well educated and fluently multilingual. I propose our teaching approach for these students can be thought of as the Swiss cheese model, because their language development is simply full of holes. As teachers of the deaf, we are looking for any strategy to fill the holes. Admittedly, some students' languages have more holes than cheese. Today, I will introduce 5 strategies that will hopefully help fill in those holes. The goal is to teach students strategies and skills so that their language will continue to develop and there won't be so many gaps. This type of strategy teaching is not a perfect solution. What would be the best solution? Hire a deaf teacher that is fluent in ASL. Hire a deaf interpreter, DI, not a hearing interpreter, a deaf interpreter. Hire a qualified teacher of the deaf who is fluent in sign language. Invite the deaf community into the school. Having these resources in place would be the best pedagogical solution. The strategies I'm going to cover can be effective, but only if you're using them to introduce English as an additional language. In some instances, your immigrant students may have fluency in the language of their country of origin. I probably don't need to warn you that your class can be a mixed bag. The research in EAL has really expanded in the last few years. However, now we have a body of research that shows the effectiveness of some of these strategies for deaf learners. 4 strategies have been identified to be effective. We have evidence these strategies help deaf and hard of hearing students attain English as an additional language. The first strategy is noticing, where we encourage students to develop metalinguistic awareness. They learn to parse a sentence to identify the structure and meaning, using direct and explicit instruction to explain elements of a sentence and their function, leading them to notice vocabulary, phrases, sentence structure. What is a noun, verb, adjective, etc. We need to provide students time to write daily. The teacher guides them towards fluency in handwriting, spelling, sentence construction, keyboarding, and word processing skills. Vocabulary development is central to their progress. Teachers must be using effective and various strategies continuously in the classroom. Mapping and visual or graphic organizers can be used to develop word attack skills. It helps the student to analyze a word, to understand the parts of a word, how they have relationships in the sentence, how the sequence has meaning. The next strategy I want to talk about, that has worked well with EAL hearing students as well as with deaf students is called genre pedagogy. This refers to understanding the different formats of text available to readers. For example, books, websites, even recipes. They all have different structures, different purposes, different processes, and they have different vocabulary, expectations, and different audiences as well. There is lots to consider when teaching using genre pedagogy. Genre methodology helps the students to develop academic language through writing. You teach and model the writing process across a variety of purposes. Vocabulary is taught within multiple contexts, in addition to word relationships. Now, are you going to study recipe books in school? No, but you're going to use academic resources, whether it's high school or university level, but not elementary resources, from a variety of contexts. The students are taught vocabulary within content areas to develop their language. Writing is key to learning the content material. The third strategy that's been taken from the field of EAL is called multimodal and multiple literacies. I know it's a mouthful. Multimodal means teaching and learning through more than one modality. For example, hearing, vision, tactile, taste, smell, kinesthetics, using all of these modes to interface with their learning. You can integrate oral and written language. You can use read aloud and shared reading activities, either in English or ASL. You teach vocabulary, which is accessible yet content-rich. Teach vocabulary within multiple modalities, using reading, writing, speaking, signing to increase word recognition. Of course, all the research is based on strategies used in the hearing population, but they have been shown to work with deaf learners as well. The last strategy I want to talk about is intercultural pedagogy. It's very important that we recognize and respect all the languages of your students' countries of origin and their cultures. It's important to provide language-based support to students equally, no matter their language. Along those lines, you will also want to look for resources that reflect their cultures and backgrounds and their overall general knowledge. You need to create an engaged community of writers who will provide feedback throughout the writing process to support the students, to connect with the students and connect them to their culture. But this needs to be done in an appropriate and supportive way. All of the EAL strategies focus on phonology, morphology, syntax, grammar, and vocabulary development. I'd like to introduce you to some resources helpful in teaching the noticing strategy. First, I would recommend you consider using Bedrock. It helps students transition their ASL to English. There's more and more research done in the area of noticing, leading to a larger variety of resources. And I rely on two main teaching resources. I use this text Basic Vocabulary in Use. It's based on current research in L2. It looks at structure and it helps the students with their noticing strategies. It's very helpful. The second resource I'd like to recommend is Functional Grammar in the ESL Classroom. My working copy is a different color than the blue book shown on the slide, but they are the same. It takes a deeper dive into noticing strategies. It has many great exercises. I use it extensively in my teaching. I'll provide examples as we go through the lecture. So what is needed to encourage noticing skills for students? I have a few suggestions on the slide here. The first requirement is vocabulary lists. That goes without saying. As teachers of the deaf, our mainstay is vocabulary lists. You will need to have some visually illustrated preposition lists. I've used lots of resources from the internet. They're easy to find. For example, for the preposition in, you could have a picture of a box with an arrow pointing in to the box. But there's lots of visual representations for prepositions. The EAL website has plenty. You can have your pick of the lot there. I have used a lot of picture books. It works with high school students, and it does really help to clarify meaning when they can see pictures that are connected to the text. It's important to try and create contextual stories that relate to the students' lives, their experiences, where they can see themselves in the stories. It can help with their writing. I use a lot of ASL glosses. It's important for them to use ASL glosses to assist in noticing English sentence structure. It can help them with contrasting and comparing between the two languages. I use video often. As a class, we make a lot of video sentences for the students to parse. We do a lot of activities with sentence patterns. It helps reinforce their learning of various sentence structures and patterns. I integrate the concept of contrastive analysis activities. For instance, the English word run has many meanings. We contrast it with all the ASL signs used for those meanings. So those are the kinds of resources that you'll need to have at your disposal when you're teaching noticing strategies. Now I want to go into a bit more detail using the comparing activity for teaching noticing. You get the students to read two similar texts which differ. You'll set the students to determine what elements are the same, like the topic, and what are different between the two texts. For example, do they notice grammatical or genre differences between the two? Then you have them practice producing texts similar to the models that you have prepared. I'll give you some examples on the next slide. Here, you see a specific vocab list for an activity to come. No matter what the exercise, we're always developing vocabulary and vocabulary lists. By covering these vocabulary items in advance, it then helps the students to later identify and make connections to the text they're reading. This is my first text, a recipe about how to cook beets. We'll ask the students to look over the text, use their vocabulary lists to identify items to help understand the text. Then we move on to the second text. This one is more contextual, more of a story. But it is still talking about how to cook beets. So both texts deal with the same topic. Students have to identify how they are different. What are the elements that make them different? The story has characters, there's dialogue, turn-taking, whereas the recipe might have a picture or it has lists. Have a robust discussion comparing the two texts. Some of the questions you can give students to help them in their noticing strategies and identifying sentence patterns are outlined here. So we know both texts provide advice about cooking beets, but which text has command statements? Which text has narrative sentences? Which text has conversations, characters, lists? What's the context for how to cook beets? What's the context for Murray cooks beets? What are the problems that are not mentioned in the procedural text? What are the steps not mentioned in the story? So comparing is one noticing strategy to help students to identify similarities and differences among texts. The next noticing strategy I want to concentrate on is sequencing. You choose a text and then you change around either the sentences or the paragraphs in the text. You have the students work on the text and try to figure out what the original sequence could have been. What would be the proper order of things for that particular text? That forces them to look at the grammatical features as clues to help determine what the original sequence would have been. Then the students practice this procedure on their own. I'll give you an example of sequencing. You can read this paragraph and you'll see that clearly things are out of order. It doesn't make sense this way. In this exercise, we're focusing on phrasal verbs and how they are associated with everyday activities. You'll notice that, basically the whole thing is out of order. Using their knowledge of grammar and sentence structure, the students have to figure out the correct sequence. This exercise is based on a chapter from the Basic Vocabulary and Use resource book. There's a chapter on phrasal verbs that I adapted. I created lessons on phrasal verbs and some of the exercises provided. Once we cover the instructional material, each student is given a text to work out the correct sequencing on their own. Now I want to show you some resources that you can use to teach sequencing. I'm a little bit embarrassed because you see on the one screen, it looks like I'm swearing at you. But that's just the way I was caught mid-motion. Okay, I'm really not swearing. I prepared a mini video lesson in ASL defining phrasal verbs and how identifying phrasal verbs helps determine sequencing. You'll often see in English the phrase take a shower, which you might think means you grab a shower with your hand, but in ASL, we would sign it this way. Let's discuss regular verbs. You might see a question like, what did you do when you got up in the morning? In ASL, we would answer, eat morning. In English, it would look like this. I have breakfast. English uses the word have in the sentence. This is really an old and tried and true strategy for noticing. This is where we take out targeted features from a text. Then the students have to figure out what's missing, what words or longer stretches of text are missing, and to fill in the gaps. You can use any text you want. You let the students read it with the blanks in the sentence. You can have the missing vocab in a list and they choose what goes into the blank or not. Once they are done filling in the gaps, ask them to read it again and explain what it means. Does it make sense? When they're all done, then you present the original text and have them compare the two. Have a discussion with the students about their reasons for the choices they made. Have them discuss their thinking. Why did their selections make sense to them? Then you can give them more practice of the same kind of work. This is an example of gap filling. This is the original text. In this case, we're focusing on pronouns and plurals. Develop your own form. I'm just using a regular Google form here. I won't be able to click on the form in this demonstration. I can show you what it looks like. Instead of blanks in this form, I am incorporating graphics to fill the gaps. Sometimes, depending on the EAL deaf or hard of hearing students' level, they don't know what kind of word they are looking for, and they may require more support. Graphics like these can serve as additional scaffolding to help them identify what is missing. I took these exercises from the Functional Grammar in the ESL Classroom book. There's plenty of examples of this kind of exercise in this resource. Again, we're focusing on pronouns, how they replace a proper name. In this case, Ilan. We're looking for them to choose the word she. In this example, we're looking at replacing pronouns and plurals. You can see the graphic has several boats to prompt the plural. On the Google form, you set it up so that the student has to pick the correct pronoun and the correct plural to match the graphics in the sentence. This sentence is targeting irregular plurals. The plural of fish does not have an S at the end. Fish is plural and singular, so it doesn't follow the rules of regular plurals. This can make things more complicated, and it would be for a more advanced student. This is even further advanced, focusing on they as a plural pronoun. We have a regular pluralized noun, and then an irregular pluralized noun. And again, in this case, we should be getting the word fish. Another noticing strategy is reconstructing text. You provide a short text containing your target features and you ask the students to identify them. They take some time to look it over. You can have a class discussion, then you can practice. They can do it orally or they can do it in sign language. Gradually, you remove the target features from the text and then you have the students recall it with the missing parts intact. You might use graphics in the blanks to help recall, or you might use ASL glosses as prompts. I tend to use ASL glosses. But in the end, you remove the entire text. You have the student perform it or recite it in some fashion from memory. This helps them reconstruct the text in their head. I'll give you an example. We did a reading as part of a performance piece. The content was Canadian history. You'll see what I mean on the next slide. This is the text I want the students to reconstruct. I wrote a play for the students. The students had to analyze the text as well as the roles of the different characters. I want them to notice the difference between the narrator and the government official. I want them to notice how the language is used for each of the characters, how it represents different points of view. The students have to take some time to analyze different targeted elements, which would be removed from the text, and figure out what they mean. The students had to insert ASL glosses as a mnemonic for the removed items. Once this was done, we would read the passage together, videotape the students practicing. But in the end, the ASL glosses, script, all documents were taken away and they had to put together the whole performance in sign language from memory. They have to use their understanding of the content, their original analysis of the content, the meaning of the whole text to create their reconstruction. Continuing with reconstructing, we're going to explore how it can be applied to analyzing phrasal verbs. In this exercise, we're going to analyze and decipher the meaning behind the lyrics and create an ASL translation of the song Lean on Me. I want to explain the purpose of phrasal verbs. I think some of you are still confused about how that works in English. It's important that you develop your skills to notice or identify a phrasal verb when you see it in a text. A phrasal verb always has two words: a verb and a preposition. A preposition is a word that tells you where things are, like under or over, on or off, around, across, through, away, or from, to. Those are the kinds of words that are called prepositions. The key is to remember you always see a combination of verb and preposition together, and that's called a phrasal verb. Sometimes you'll notice the phrasal verb combination. You'll see a verb and a preposition side by side, but the meaning is unclear or confusing. For example, put on. You'll see those words together, put on. What does that actually mean? It might not be obvious. You have to use more of your ASL skills. Is the sentence put on a coat? If yes, then this is how it would be signed. Another phrase we see often in English is get over. Perhaps in a sentence like, I am getting over a cold. It is a phrasal verb. It's got the word get as a verb and the word over as a preposition. But what does it mean? Again, you're going to have to use context to understand what is meant and see if you can make sense of it in ASL. It means that your cold is almost gone. Perhaps it started with a sore throat, then you started feeling unwell, feeling tired, then it became a full-on runny-nosed cold. That might have gone on for 2 or 3 days. You were probably feeling pretty miserable about it. But eventually, you start feeling better. And finally, the cold is gone. Finish. That describes the process of getting over a cold. Phrasal verbs are not easy to understand in English. It starts by noticing phrasal verbs in what you are reading. Phrasal verbs have different meaning than the individual words. Okay? We're still continuing the discussion of phrasal verbs. Remember the example I gave before about get over? I talked about the sentence, I am getting over a cold. I explained that it means you've been feeling sick with a cold, and though you've been feeling lousy, your body is fighting it off. Finish. That's what get over means in that sentence. Hearing people will also use the phrasal verb get over in a sentence like get over it. That's a confusing phrasal verb. In ASL, it means finish. Stop worrying about whatever's bothering you. Perhaps you have some problem or some worry or something else that you've been thinking about a lot, like maybe a new girlfriend. If someone is telling you to get over it, they think you should stop thinking about it so much. Stop perseverating on it. Stop. Finish. That's what get over it means in ASL. A third example of a phrasal verb is get up. How do you get an up? It really makes no sense when you put those two words together. That is, when you think about the meaning of the individual words, the verb get and the preposition up. What it means in ASL is, if you're sitting, then you're getting up like this. If you're in bed, you're getting up like this. The students would review all of the instructional videos on phrasal verbs. I've only shown you 4 to give you the idea, but I made a number of them. After the students review all the instructional material, then they were tasked to analyze the lyrics of the song Lean on Me, line by line, and to identify all the different phrasal verbs. As I mentioned, the students review all the instructional videos. I made over 12 on phrasal verbs. I showed you 4 so that you could get the idea. After the students review all that information, then they take one line from the song, Lean on Me, to analyze. The analysis includes drawing a picture of what they think the line means. Then they have to create an ASL gloss for their understanding of the line. Then we have a group discussion to further explore the English meaning and how to represent that in ASL. Next, they restructure their lines. Then we filmed the students signing their lines. Here's an example of the video reconstruction of Lean on Me. I should mention this video is public. It was a production of the Deaf Crows Collective. The students and the parents have all authorized it to be shown publicly. I am only showing you a short bit. It will give you an idea of the project's final product. Another noticing strategy is elaborating. We want the students to provide more detail, to create sentences that are more complicated than simple text. We are trying to get the student to understand that simple, basic sentences don't provide much information. If sentences are more elaborate, the meaning is clearer and it is more interesting or exciting to read. Then the students are given exercises writing elaborations. For example, an elaboration here is changing a simple sentence by using descriptive words such as adjectives, adverbs, and in this exercise, a who clause. The exercise starts with one simple sentence based on artwork pictured of two people walking. The original sentence is, "The mother and daughter walked home." We did several iterations of the students elaborating on this sentence. I prompted their thinking by asking, what do they see in the picture? What detail can they add? What's of interest? This encourages their noticing strategies by targeting elaborating elements. In this example, noun phrases and adjectives, verb phrases and adverbs. Then moving on to adding noun phrases and adjectives and learning to add who clauses. Another noticing strategy is transforming. Start with some original text that contains the features that you want to have transformed into a different text or a different context. Examples include a play, visual art, a poster, even a recipe. The point is, the students transform one text to another. They take time to consider the original text. They make their notes, think about how they could transform it into a different form, be it a document, performance, or something else. They need to give reasons for the choices they have made. This is key. It has to be a purposeful activity. Let's go back to the texts on cooking beets in earlier slides. What could be the reason to transform one text to the other? Maybe someone cannot follow the instructions in the contextual story about how to cook beets, so it needs to be transformed into a recipe which provides clearer instructions about how they can be cooked. This way, the students can take information from one form, identify what is salient, pick out the important features, and transform the same information into another format, whatever that might be. Many of the students really enjoy Shakespeare. and they were especially excited to study Romeo and Juliet. They were asked to watch the movie and then to read the play. They read it in the original Shakespearean verse, so that's pretty tough. Then I asked them to concentrate on the passage of the death scene. You're all familiar with it. The salient points are that Juliet is upset at being forced to marry another man. She conspires to get some medicines that, once taken, will make her appear to be dead. Her family finds her dead. They are grief-stricken. They have a funeral and they lay the body to rest. She's not actually buried, but she's laid to rest in a crypt. Romeo hears of her death and is beside himself. He buys poison because, if the news is true, he cannot possibly live without her. He makes his way to the crypt, sees Juliet dead, what he thinks is Juliet dead. He takes the poison and really dies. Sometime after, Juliet wakes up and is heartbroken that Romeo has died. She stabs herself and kills herself. After analyzing this passage, I asked the students to create a storyboard because we're going to make a movie, a claymation movie. Each part of the movie has to be fully planned out. In visual storytelling, considerations include line, shape, tone, color, camera point of view, such as positioning and angle of the shot. So the students really have to think about this, all the steps involved, all the elements they want to include. Part of the process is to have the students explain the rationale for the decisions they make. Each step in the storyboarding planning, the sequencing, determining camera angles, considering the character's point of view, the events of the scene, all of that. They were allowed to use props, dolls, or other items, not just clay figures, which they had to sculpt. And they also had to create the background. Here is one example of a student's storyboard creation of each scene. Through purposeful activities, an original text is transformed into some other version of that content, leading the students to deepen their noticing skills. Now to summarize. Noticing strategies require students to work with text to notice how features, function, and meaning is expressed in English. We're leading the students to a higher level of cognition and development of metalinguistic skills. Noticing strategies can be applied to phonology, morphology, syntax, and vocabulary development. Exploring those features and their functions in English is an effective approach to working with L2 learners.